The rain-soaked street glistened under the neon lights of Seattle's Capitol Hill, and I was running late, my heart pounding like a drum in a storm. I dodged a group of laughing friends spilling out a bar, my sneakers splashing through puddles, my mind a tangle of nerves and defiance. Tonight was the night I'd finally step into the world I'd hidden from for 23 years, a world I wasn't sure I deserved. My name is Elias Torres, and I grew up in a small town in eastern Washington where being different wasn't just frowned upon. It was a sin whispered about in church pews. I'd spent years burying who I was, pretending the glances I stole at boys in high school were just curiosity, not longing. But tonight I was done hiding. I'd driven 3 hours to attend my first ever Pride event, a fundraiser at a local cafe called Rainbow Brew. It wasn't just a party, it was a declaration. I was here to be seen, even if my hands shook at the thought. The cafe was a riot of color when I pushed through the door, the air thick with the scent of espresso and the buzz of voices. Rainbow flags hung from the ceiling, and fairy lights twinkled like stars. I scanned the room, feeling like an imposter in my plain black hoodie. Everyone else seemed so sure of themselves, dancing, laughing, holding hands without a trace of fear. I wanted that freedom, but it felt like a language I didn't speak. That's when I saw him. Across the room, leaning against the counter, was a guy who looked like he'd stepped out of a dream I didn't know I'd had. He had a shock of auburn hair that caught the light, a colorful scarf looped around his neck, and a smile that could have lit the whole city. He was talking to a group, his hands moving animatedly, but his eyes, bright and green, locked onto mine for a split second. My breath caught, and I looked away, heat creeping up my neck. I wasn't here to stare at strangers. I was here to find myself. First time, a voice said, close enough to make me jump. I turned, and there he was, the guy with the scarf, holding 2 cups of something steaming. Up close, he was even more striking. Freckles dusted his cheeks, and his smile was softer, almost shy. You look like you're about to bolt, he added, offering me a cup. Chai latte. It's on the house. I took it, my fingers brushing his, and mumbled, thanks. Yeah, first time. My voice sounded too small, too raw. I wasn't used to being noticed. I'm Julian, he said, his eyes searching mine like he could see the storm inside me. And you're... Elias, I managed, my heart racing. I didn't know why, but talking to him felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, terrifying, exhilarating, inevitable. Julian tilted his head, studying me. Well, Elias, you picked a hell of a night to show up. Stick with me, and I'll make sure you don't get lost in the chaos. He winked, and before I could protest, he was pulling me toward a group of people dancing to a pulsing beat. I wanted to resist, to shrink back into the shadows, but something about his warmth, his ease, made me follow. The night blurred into a kaleidoscope of moments. Julian introducing me to his friends, all of them welcoming me like I belonged. The way he laughed when I tripped over my own feet during a dance. The stories he told about his own coming out, raw and honest, like he wasn't afraid of his scars. He was a graphic designer, he said, who'd moved to Seattle to live loudly after years of hiding in a conservative suburb. Every word he spoke felt like a lifeline, pulling me closer to something I couldn't name. By midnight, the cafe was packed, the energy electric. Julian grabbed my hand, his touch sending a jolt through me, and led me outside to a quieter corner of the street. The rain had stopped, leaving the air cool and crisp. We sat on a bench, our knees brushing, and he looked at me with that same intensity I'd seen earlier. So, Elias, he said softly, what's your story? Why tonight? I froze. I'd spent so long guarding my truth that sharing it felt like ripping open a wound. But his eyes were kind, not judging, and the words spilled out before I could stop them. I told him about my small-town life, the sermons that called people like me broken, the nights I'd spent praying to be someone else. I told him how I'd driven here tonight because I couldn't keep pretending, but I was terrified I'd never be enough. Julian listened, his face unreadable, but his hand resting lightly on mine. When I finished, my chest felt raw, exposed. I waited for him to pull away, to tell me I was too much, too damaged. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice low and steady. "You're not broken, Elias," he said. "You're just starting." And then, without warning, he kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, like he was giving me a chance to pull back. But I didn't. I couldn't. The world fell away. The noise of the street, the weight of my past, the fear that had chained me for years. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of chai, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. We pulled back, his eyes were wide, like he was as surprised as I was. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, his cheeks flushing. "I didn't mean to." "Don't be," I interrupted, my voice shaky but sure. "That was everything." He smiled, and in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning. The days after that kiss felt like waking up in a world painted in colors I'd never seen before. I drove back to my tiny apartment in Yakima, the memory of Julian's lips burning in my mind, his phone number scrawled on a napkin tucked in my pocket. I wanted to call him, to hear his voice again, but every time I picked up my phone, doubt crept in. What if that night was a fluke? What if he'd only kissed me out of pity? Work kept me busy, stocking shelves at a local grocery store, a job I'd taken to save up for a life I hadn't yet dared to dream of. But now, every aisle felt too small, every conversation with coworkers too mundane. I kept replaying Julian's words, "You're not broken." They echoed in my head, challenging the voice that had always told me otherwise. On Tuesday, I finally worked up the courage to text him. Just a simple, "Hey, it's Elias. Thanks for the other night." My heart pounded as I hit send, and I spent the next hour staring at my phone, jumping at every notification. When his reply came, "Hey, stranger, thought you ghosted me. Want to grab coffee this weekend?" I grinned so wide my cheeks hurt. We met at a small coffee shop in Seattle, a cozy place with mismatched chairs and walls covered in local art. Julian was already there when I arrived, sketching something in a notebook, his scarf a bright splash of color against the gray day. He looked up and smiled, and my nerves melted away. "You made it," he said, closing his notebook. "I was starting to think Yakima had swallowed you whole." I laughed, sliding into the seat across from him. "It's trying, but I'm here." We talked for hours, the conversation flowing as easily as it had at the cafe. He told me about his latest design project, a poster for a local queer youth group, and I found myself hanging on his every word. There was something about Julian, his passion, his openness, that made me want to be braver, to step out of the shadows I'd lived in for so long. But bravery wasn't easy. Growing up, I'd learned to keep my head down, to avoid questions about why I wasn't dating, why I didn't bring girls home. My parents were kind but distant, their love tied to expectations I could never meet. Coming out to them wasn't an option, not yet. The thought of their disappointment, their judgment, was a weight I carried everywhere. Julian seemed to sense it. As we walked along the waterfront later that day, the Puget Sound sparkling under the sun, he asked, "You ever think about telling your family about who you are?" I stopped, staring at the water. "All the time, but it's complicated. They're not like the people here. They wouldn't understand." He nodded, his expression soft but serious. "I get it. My parents didn't talk to me for a year after I came out. But sometimes you have to choose yourself, even if it hurts." His words hit me hard, stirring something deep inside. I wanted to be that brave, to choose myself, but the fear was still there, a shadow I couldn't outrun. Julian reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine, and for a moment the fear felt smaller. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. Texts turned into phone calls into weekend trips to Seattle. Each time I saw him, I felt a little more like myself, like the Elias I'd always wanted to be. We explored the city together, from hole-in-the-wall taco joints to late-night poetry slams. He showed me parts of myself I'd never dare to look at, and I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as broken as I'd thought. But not everything was easy. One night, as we sat in his tiny apartment, a cozy space filled with art supplies and half-finished canvases. I told him about the nightmares I still had, dreams of being shunned, of losing everyone I loved. Julian listened, his hand resting on my knee, and when I finished, he pulled me into a hug. "You're not alone in this," he whispered. "I'm here." I wanted to believe him, but the fear lingered. And then, one rainy afternoon, everything changed. The call came on a gray October day, the kind where the rain never stops and the world feels too heavy. I was at work, restocking canned goods, when my phone buzzed. It was my mom. Her voice was tight, urgent. "Elias, it's your dad. He's in the hospital. Heart attack." The world tilted. I don't remember much of what happened next, just that I grabbed my keys, told my boss I had to go, and drove the 3 hours to Spokane, my hands shaking on the wheel. My dad, the man who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who'd always been a quiet pillar in our family, was fighting for his life. And I hadn't told him the truth about who I was. At the hospital, I found my mom in the waiting room, her eyes red from crying. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, I was just her son again, not the secret I'd been carrying. My sister, Maria, was there too, pacing with her phone in hand. We sat together, the hours dragging on, the beeping of machines, and the sterile smell of the hospital suffocating me. Dad pulled through, thank God, but he was weak, his face pale against the hospital sheets. When I finally got to see him, he reached for my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "You okay, kid?" he asked, his voice rough. I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, Dad, I'm okay." But I wasn't. That night, back at my parents' house, I couldn't sleep. The weight of everything, my dad's fragility, my own secrets, the life I was starting to build with Julian, was too much. I texted Julian at 2 a.m., my fingers trembling. "I don't know how to do this," I wrote. "I'm scared I'll lose them." His reply came almost instantly. "You won't lose yourself, Elias. And you won't lose me. Come back to Seattle when you're ready. I'll be here." I went back to Yakima the next day, but the hospital visit had shaken something loose in me. I couldn't keep living half a life, pretending to be someone I wasn't. I called Julian and asked if I could stay with him for a few days. He didn't hesitate. "My couch is yours," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Seattle felt different this time, like a place I could belong. Julian's apartment became my refuge, a space where I could breathe. We spent evenings cooking terrible meals together, laughing until our sides hurt. He showed me his latest designs, vibrant posters that screamed joy and defiance. And I told him about my dream of becoming a writer, something I'd never dared say out loud before. But the hospital wasn't the only storm brewing. One evening, as we walked through Pike Place Market, Julian's phone buzzed with a message that made his face go pale. He tried to brush it off, but I pressed him. "What's wrong?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's my ex. He's been harassing me. Nothing serious, just texts, but it's getting under my skin." I felt a surge of protectiveness, mixed with something darker, jealousy, maybe, or fear. "What's he saying?" Julian hesitated, then showed me the messages. They were cruel, taunting, accusing Julian of abandoning him. I wanted to punch something, but Julian just shook his head. "He's hurting. I don't hate him. I don't want him in my life anymore." That night, as we lay on his couch, the city lights filtering through the window, I realized how much Julian meant to me. He wasn't just a guide or a crush. He was becoming my home. But with that realization came a new fear. What if I wasn't enough for him? What if my baggage, my fears, dragged him down? Winter settled over Seattle, blanketing the city in a quiet chill. My visits to Julian's apartment became more frequent, each one stitching us closer together. But the shadow of his ex, Ryan, loomed larger. The texts didn't stop, and one night, Julian admitted Ryan had shown up at his workplace, demanding to talk. Julian had sent him away, but the encounter left him shaken. "I don't get it," I said, stirring a pot of soup in his cramped kitchen. "Why is he doing this? You've moved on." Julian leaned against the counter, his arms crossed. "Ryan's not good at letting go. We were together for 2 years, and it was intense. Toxic toward the end. He thinks he can pull me back. Anger flared in my chest. He can't. You're not his. Julian's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I know. I'm right where I want to be. His words sent a shiver through me, but they also sharpened my resolve. I wanted to protect him, to be the kind of person who could stand by his side. But that meant facing my own demons. Back in Yakima, I started writing again, pouring my fears and hopes into stories. It was Julian who encouraged me, reading my drafts and leaving notes in the margins. Half critique, half love letter. You've got a voice, Elias, he said one night over video call. Don't hide it. Inspired, I submitted a short story to a local literary contest, a piece about a boy finding courage in a world that didn't understand him. To my shock, it won. The prize was small, but the validation was enormous. Julian was the first person I told, and his pride in me felt like sunlight. But life has a way of testing you just when you think you're steady. One weekend, as I drove to Seattle, my sister called. Elias, Mom found some of your texts. The ones to that guy, Julian. She's freaking out. My stomach dropped. I'd been careful, or so I thought, but I'd left my phone unlocked at home. What did she say? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She's upset. Dad's trying to calm her down, but you need to come home. Talk to them. I arrived at Julian's apartment in a daze. He took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. Whatever happens, you've got me, he said. But you need to decide what you want to say to them. I spent the night wrestling with that question. Did I tell my parents everything, risk their rejection? Or did I keep hiding, let them think I was still the son they wanted? Julian stayed up with me, listening, never pushing. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I drove back to Yakima, my heart in my throat. My parents were waiting in the living room, their faces a mix of worry and confusion. I took a deep breath and told them the truth. I was gay. Ide Mitshimwan. His name was Julian, and he was helping me become the person I was meant to be. The silence that followed was deafening. My mom's eyes filled with tears, and my dad just stared at the floor. Finally, my mom spoke, her voice trembling. Elias, we love you. But this is hard for us. We need time. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. It was a start. The weeks after coming out to my parents were a blur of tension and tentative hope. They didn't call me much, but they didn't shut me out either. Maria, bless her, became my bridge, relaying messages and checking in. They're trying, Elias, she said. It's just new for them. Meanwhile, Julian and I grew closer. He invited me to a queer art showcase, where his latest project, a series of posters celebrating resilience, was on display. Seeing his work, bold and unapologetic, made me want to be bolder too. I started writing more, submitting stories to magazines, each one a small act of courage. But Ryan's shadow lingered. One evening, as we left the showcase, I noticed a figure watching us from across the street. Julian's grip on my hand tightened. That's him, he whispered. Ryan was tall, with sharp features and a scowl that made my skin crawl. He didn't approach, but his presence was enough to unsettle us both. Later, at Julian's apartment, he admitted Ryan had been leaving voicemails, each one angrier than the last. We need to do something, I said, my voice firm. This isn't okay. Julian nodded, but his eyes were tired. I've been thinking about a restraining order, but it's hard. I don't want to escalate things. I hated how much Ryan was still hurting him. That night, I held Julian close, promising myself I'd do whatever it took to keep him safe. The next day, we went to the police station together. Filing the report was daunting, but Julian's hand in mine gave me strength. The officer was kind, assuring us they'd look into it. As we left, Julian turned to me, his eyes bright with something new, relief, maybe, or hope. You didn't have to come with me, he said, but I'm so glad you did. I'm not going anywhere, I replied, and I meant it. Back in Yakima, I got a surprise call from my dad. His voice was gruff, hesitant. Elias, your mom and I, we've been talking. We want to meet this Julian guy. If he's important to you, He's important to us. My heart swelled. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. I told Julian, and he grinned, already planning a dinner to charm them. I'm good with parents, he said, winking. Just wait. Spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal. Julian and I planned the dinner with my parents, a nerve-wracking but exciting step. We chose a neutral spot, a cozy Italian restaurant in Spokane, and I spent the week before agonizing over what to say, how to bridge the gap between my old life and the one I was building. The dinner went better than I dared hope. Julian was his charming self, telling stories that made my mom laugh and asking my dad about his old carpentry projects. By the end of the night, my parents were smiling, and my mom even hugged Julian before we left. "You take care of our boy," she whispered to him, and I nearly cried. But life wasn't done throwing curveballs. A few days later, Julian got a call from the police. Ryan had violated the restraining order, showing up at Julian's workplace again. This time, he'd been arrested. The news shook Julian, but it also freed him. "It's over," he said, his voice trembling with relief. "He can't hurt me anymore." We celebrated that night, just the two of us, with takeout and a cheesy rom-com. As we sat on his couch, wrapped in a blanket, Julian turned to me. "I love you, Elias," he said, his voice quiet but sure. My heart stopped, then raced. I'd known I loved him for weeks, but hearing it from him felt like a gift. "I love you too," I said, and we kissed, slow and deep, the world fading away. That summer, I made a decision. I quit my job in Yakima and moved to Seattle. It was terrifying, leaving everything familiar behind. But Julian was there, helping me find a new job at a bookstore and cheering me on as I submitted more stories. My writing was gaining traction, with one piece accepted by a national magazine. For the first time, I felt like I was building a life I could be proud of. A year after that first kiss, I stood on a stage at the Rainbow Brew, reading one of my stories to a packed room. Julian was in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. My parents were there too, sitting near the back, their presence a quiet testament to how far we'd come. They weren't fully there yet, but they were trying, and that was enough for now. My story was about a boy who thought he was broken, who found love and courage in the most unexpected place, a cafe on a rainy night, under rainbow flags and fairy lights. As I read, I felt the weight of my past lift, replaced by a lightness I'd never known. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was living. After the reading, Julian pulled me into a hug, whispering, "You're incredible." We stepped outside, the Seattle night cool and clear, the stars bright above us. I thought about that first kiss, how it had sparked a journey I never could have imagined. It hadn't just healed me. It had shown me that I was never broken, only waiting to be found. We walked hand in hand, the city alive around us, and I knew this was only the beginning. Together, we'd face whatever came next, fear, joy, love, all of it. Because that's what love does. It takes the pieces you thought were shattered and builds something whole, something beautiful.